and very little of that radiation is being trapped in the way that the UN's models predict that it will. And this is direct measurement, and measurement always trumps models. Models are a guess about what might happen. Measurement is a recording of what actually is happening. And what is happening is that nearly all of the outgoing radiation that ought to be getting stuck down here and therefore causing warming is in fact escaping to outer space much more than it did, so that the warming effect from doubling the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere, which we might achieve between now and the end of the century if we try really hard, will have virtually no effect on temperature, maybe half a degree, maybe 1 degree Celsius. That's 1 to 2 Fahrenheit, and that is all, and it's harmless. And everybody now knows this because these measurements have been taken, and there really isn't very much argument about it. We also know that the oceans have not been accumulating heat energy over the last 68 years, and that too is fatal to the official theory, which says that if we're causing the warming, the oceans should be warming too, and they're not. We also know that the clouds that should form as the Earth warms do not exercise a reinforcing warming effect, as the UN pretends. In fact, they exert quite a considerable countervailing cooling effect. And there are several papers in the literature that establish this, another major one just about to come out as we speak. Go further up to the tropical upper air, where the UN's models are all taught to predict that there will be 3 times as much warming in the tropical upper air as there is on the tropical surface. In fact, that differential warming rate, again, which is a characteristic signature, apparently, of us causing the warming, has never been observed in 50 years of radiosonde records and 30 years of satellite records of the upper troposphere. It simply isn't happening. The only paper that tried to suggest that it is happening used a bogus, invented data set which had never been published before, and that data set is simply discredited. Indeed, that particular paper is now the subject of a police fraud inquiry. So the science has completely collapsed. We know from the oceans, from the clouds, from the tropical upper troposphere, all the way to outer space, with all these different measurements that confirm one another, that there is no longer a climate problem. So that puts CO2 into some perspective. Now we come on to ClimateGate. Now, ClimateGate is a series of thousands of emails going back 10 years, the most recent of them being just a few weeks ago, written between most of the world's most eminent climatologists and climate scientists who were on the UN's climate panel and who were in all the leading meteorological institutions. And there were just 24 people involved in these emails, everybody from Jim Hansen to Ben Santer to Phil Jones at the University of East Anglia, where the emails appear to have originated from. And there are just 24 of these people, and they were essentially writing to each other saying, we're going to try and stop anyone who has an alternative point of view from ever getting anything published, either in the UN's climate reports or in the peer-reviewed literature. We're going to make sure that we delay any contrarian papers till we have had the chance to think up an answer, however bogus. We're going to interfere with the data. We're going to tamper with it. Anybody who wants to check what we're doing, we're going to refuse their freedom of information requests, and if necessary, we'll destroy the data so that they can't look at it. So it reveals essentially a large, nasty scientific fraud on a very large scale, and it raises very serious questions about whether anything in the UN's documents can now be relied upon insofar as they touch on the climate. All the 4 UN climate assessment reports are now under a cloud. Most of these wretches who have been writing these emails are themselves under a cloud. I know of at least 2 police investigations into what they've got up to, and there will be more to come as more scientists learn about how they were made victim of these cruel and very nasty people. The thing that strikes most people who read these ClimateGate emails, and they are available online, just type in the word ClimateGate emails and you will find even a searchable database of them. The thing that strikes most people who read these emails is how nasty this clique of left-wing scientists was. These are really unpleasant people who had not the slightest intention of doing honest or decent science. They were crooks, taking advantage of the ignorance of science among the bureaucratic class, among politicians, and among the public generally, and exploiting that ignorance in a vicious, nasty, organized and coordinated way which, as I say, is now being investigated as criminal fraud in a number of different directions. And I'm expecting some of these wretches to end up in jail for a very long time.
Good.
Teach the rest of the scientific community that you do not simply adopt a political position and then adapt and bend the science to fit your nasty Marxist politics. So that's ClimateGate. It has electrified the general public. It has been ignored almost entirely by the mainstream news media, who are themselves tied into this conspiracy in a very big way. They have done their best to mention the ClimateGate emails only through gritted teeth and as briefly as possible. They haven't actually mentioned what is in these emails. They haven't said what the emails have said. They haven't said what they mean. They've done their best to ignore it. And what is happening is that people are gradually having to switch away from getting their news on the mainstream media and getting it instead on the internet, which, although you can't always tell how reliable the sources are, you can at least get information which the mainstream news media no longer bothers to supply. And that, I think, is one of the biggest effects that's going to come out of ClimateGate, the realization on the part of many of us that there is absolutely no point in our subscribing to a daily newspaper if the daily newspaper will not give us even the facts, because it's so busy just giving us Marxist opinions by its environmental editors. And we are about to cancel our subscription to the Daily Telegraph for that reason, and we know of thousands of other people who are going to do the same because they can simply no longer rely on the mainstream newspapers to tell them what the facts are so that we can make our own minds up about the facts. Instead, they're suppressing those facts that don't fit their increasingly communistic worldview. I find that deplorable, and as I say, the internet now is my medium of choice for finding out what's going on, because at least there somebody will give me the facts. I can no longer rely on the unspeakable BBC or even the Daily Telegraph, which used to be the newspaper of record and used to give you the facts. And it's the same with the Washington Post, the New York Times. All of these, I've watched them over the years degenerating into mere propaganda sheets for the extreme left. They simply won't print even the facts which might point in the other direction, let alone opinions in the other direction. But it's the facts I want, and the mainstream media no longer deliver them.
No, that's definitely a fact. Let's talk about, I agree with you completely on it being criminal what these people are doing. And to expand on that a little bit, Britain has put out the OPT report, and China released studies claiming that removing population is the cheapest way to combat climate change. If the climate science is false, then what's the real reason for all the population annihilation rhetoric?
I think it is that they've realized that they can't persuade the people with their lies anymore about how terrible the climate all is. And therefore they say, well, let's use a different tack. If we can't get the people to cut their carbon emissions, let's try and cut down the number of people. Now, in fact, there's no need to do that, because as the world becomes more prosperous, and of course using fossil fuels is the way to make the world more prosperous, as it becomes more prosperous, its population tends to stabilize. In all the richer countries where we have a reasonable level of prosperity for nearly everybody, the population is stable, or in Western Europe, were it not for net immigration, it's actually collapsing. We're no longer anything like that replacement rate. The population is declining at a rampantly rapid rate. The same would be happening in the United States were it not for, again, a combination of immigration and the fact that you already have very large immigrant communities, generally poorer than the average, who therefore continue to breed at a faster rate than the average. But in the very poor countries, such as China or India, you get a continuing and very fast increase in population, notwithstanding attempts in India 20 years ago to impose enforced artificial sterilization, and in China to impose the one-child policy, which led ludicrously but murderously to the killing, for instance, at random of one child. If supposing there were twins born, then the soldiers would come and they'd just shoot one of the children. That was what was going on. And of course that kind of population control is morally altogether unacceptable. And it's one of the reasons why I'm still very leery of doing too much business with China. This is an unspeakable alien communist regime that cares nothing for the well-being of its own people. But what it does do, and this we give China credit for, is it's begun to realize that however much it tries to enforce one-child policies with this goonish going around and killing children, that won't work, and nor is it something that they can get away with in the long run. You know, at the Court of World Opinion, and eventually in the International Criminal Court, Chinese leaders are going to be put on trial for allowing this kind of murder routinely to take place. So they've realized that, and they've realized that the way to stabilize their population, indeed the only thing that ever works if you want to stabilize population, is to raise the standard of living of a subsistence poor population to a level where they are at a reasonable standard of living. And at that point, once you achieve that for the whole general population rather than just for a few in the Marxist elite, then and only then your population will stabilize all by itself. You don't have